At 32, Adrian Cole stood in the driveway of a house he never wanted, holding the hand of a daughter who deserved better than the wreckage he'd become. The inheritance letter had arrived the same week his ex-wife threatened to take Mia for good, claiming he was unfit, unstable, drowning. She wasn't entirely wrong. He'd driven 8 hours through the night to escape the fight, to buy himself time, to figure out how a man who could barely keep his own head above water was supposed to raise a child alone. But when the woman next door stepped onto her pristine porch that first morning, tailored, untouchable, and studying him like he was a stain on her view, Adrian realized he'd traded one impossible situation for another. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's dive in. Adrian's hands were still shaking when he turned the key in the lock. The door stuck, swollen from humidity or neglect, and he had to put his shoulder into it before it finally gave way with a groan that echoed through the empty hall. Dust hung in the air, visible in the slant of late afternoon light coming through the grimy windows. The house smelled like old wood and something vaguely medicinal. His uncle's last years compressed into a scent that made Adrian's throat tighten. "It's gross," Mia said from behind him, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. "Yeah," Adrian agreed, because lying to her had stopped working around the time she turned 7. "It is." She stepped inside anyway, her sneakers leaving prints in the dust on the hardwood. 8 years old and already too used to adapting, to making the best of situations that adults had screwed up for her. Adrian watched her wander toward what must have been the living room, her small frame swallowed by the emptiness of the space, and felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settle on his chest. He'd been surviving on 4 hours of sleep for the past 3 months, juggling a job that barely covered rent with a custody battle that was draining what little savings he had left. The apartment in the city had been a shoebox, but it had been theirs. Then Jennifer had filed her motion, armed with a lawyer whose retainer alone was more than Adrian made in 6 months, claiming that Mia deserved stability, structure, things a struggling single father working double shifts couldn't provide. The inheritance had felt like a lifeline when the letter arrived. His uncle Martin, a man Adrian had met maybe twice in his entire life, had left him a house in some town Adrian couldn't even find on a map without zooming in. The lawyer handling the estate said it was worth enough to solve his immediate problems, pay off Jennifer's lawyer, maybe buy himself some breathing room. All he had to do was get the place listed, sign some papers, and get back to the city before Jennifer's legal team could twist his absence into evidence of abandonment. 2 weeks, Adrian had told himself, 3 at most. "Dad, there's a dead mouse in here." Adrian closed his eyes. "Don't touch it." "I'm not stupid." He found her crouched in the corner of the living room, staring at a desiccated corpse with the clinical interest of a crime scene investigator. She'd gotten that from him, the tendency to examine disasters instead of running from them. He wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. "We'll deal with it tomorrow," he said, even though he had no idea how. "Let's find the bedrooms." The house was bigger than he'd expected. 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. His uncle had lived alone for decades, and it showed in the stark functionality of everything. No decoration, no warmth, just the bare minimum required for existence. Adrian tried not to see it as a preview of his own future. He gave Mia the smaller bedroom upstairs, the one with a window that looked out over the backyard. She dropped her backpack on the bare mattress someone, probably the estate lawyer, had left behind and went straight to the window, pressing her nose against the glass. "There's a huge house next door," she said, "like really huge." Adrian joined her at the window, and yeah, she wasn't exaggerating. The property next to theirs was a different universe entirely. Manicured lawn, modern architecture, the kind of place that showed up in magazines about people who'd made better choices than Adrian ever had. The contrast was almost funny. Almost. "Don't stare," he said, gently pulling her back. "We're not here to make friends." "You never want to make friends." She said it without accusation, just stating a fact, but it still landed like a punch. Adrian turned away from the window, running a hand through hair that needed cutting. "I'm going to check out the rest of the house. Stay up here, okay?" She was already pulling a book from her backpack, settling cross-legged on the mattress. Self-sufficient in the way kids got when the adults around them were too busy falling apart to notice. Adrian left her there and headed back downstairs, each step creaking under his weight. The kitchen was worse than he remembered from his first pass. Linoleum peeling at the corners, appliances that belonged in a museum, a smell coming from under the sink that he didn't want to investigate. He opened the back door, desperate for fresh air, and stepped out onto a sagging porch that overlooked the yard. The fence separating his property from the mansion next door was in the process of dying. Wooden posts leaned at drunken angles, boards missing or rotted through, the whole thing looking like a strong wind would finish it off. Adrian stared at it, adding "fix fence" to the growing list of things he didn't have time or money for, and tried not to feel the walls closing in. "You're the nephew." The voice came from the other side of the fence, and Adrian nearly jumped. He looked up to find a woman standing in the perfectly maintained yard next door, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a boardroom. White blouse, tailored pants, dark hair pulled back in a way that probably had a specific name he didn't know. She was looking at him with the kind of expression people reserved for things they were trying to categorize. "Adrian," he said, because what else was he supposed to say? "Adrian Cole." "Elena Voss." She didn't move closer, didn't offer a hand across the broken fence. "Martin spoke about you, once or twice." That surprised him. "He did?" "Briefly, before he—" She gestured vaguely, the movement economical and precise. "I'm sorry for your loss." The phrase was standard, automatic, the kind of thing people said because they were supposed to. Adrian appreciated that she didn't try to make it sound sincere. "Thanks. I didn't really know him. I gathered." Elena's gaze shifted to the house behind him, assessing. "How long are you planning to stay?" "Just long enough to get the place ready to sell." Something flickered across her face. Relief? Maybe, or approval. "The fence is on your property line," she said, switching topics without transition. "Technically your responsibility." Adrian looked at the collapsing structure between them. "Yeah, I can see that." "Martin kept saying he'd fix it. He never did." "Sounds like Martin." Elena's mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. "It's an eyesore. I'll add it to the list." They stood there for a moment, two strangers separated by rotting wood and what felt like several tax brackets, neither quite sure how to end the conversation. Elena broke first, stepping back with a small nod. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, and it sounded like a dismissal. Adrian watched her walk back toward her house, her posture perfect, everything about her screaming control and competence. Then he turned back to his inherited disaster and tried to remember what it felt like to have either of those things. The first night was brutal. Mia couldn't sleep in the unfamiliar room, so she ended up in Adrian's bed, sprawled sideways and stealing all the blankets while Adrian lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house made noises, settling, creaking, a rhythmic drip somewhere he couldn't locate. His phone buzzed twice with messages from Jennifer's lawyer, which he ignored, and once with a text from his boss asking when he'd be back, which he also ignored. At 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went downstairs to start going through his uncle's things. Martin Cole had been a pack rat. The closets were stuffed with boxes of newspapers, old receipts, broken electronics that he'd apparently kept with the intention of fixing someday. Adrian pulled everything out onto the living room floor, sorting it into piles, trash, donate, maybe worth something. Most of it was trash. He found a photo album buried under a stack of National Geographics from the 90s. The pictures were old, faded, mostly of people Adrian didn't recognize. But there were a few of his father, Martin's younger brother, looking young and happy in a way Adrian had never seen in person. His dad had died when Adrian was 12, sudden and stupid, a heart attack at 43. Martin had shown up to the funeral, stayed for an hour, then disappeared back to wherever he'd been living. Adrian remembered thinking he seemed sad and relieved in equal measure, like he was mourning the obligation more than the man. "Dad?" Mia stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair sticking up in every direction. "Hey, Bug. Can't sleep?" She shook her head and came to sit next to him on the floor. She shook her head and, looking at the scattered debris of a stranger's life. "What are you doing?" "Trying to figure out what to keep." She picked up a framed photo of Martin standing in front of this house, younger but still alone. "He looks sad." "Yeah, he does." "Were you friends with him?" "No, I barely knew him." Mia processed this with the seriousness she applied to everything. "Then why did he give you his house?" Adrian had been asking himself the same question. "I don't know. Maybe he didn't have anyone else." That's sad too. She leaned against him, warm and solid and real, and Adrian wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. This was what mattered. Not the house, not Jennifer's threats, not the impossible task of fixing a fence he couldn't afford to replace. Just this, making sure Mia knew she wasn't alone, even when he felt like he was drowning. "Let's try to get some sleep," he said. "Real sleep this time. Will you stay with me?" "Yeah, Bug. I'll stay." They went back upstairs together, and this time Adrian didn't even pretend to use his own room. He lay next to Mia in the narrow bed, her breathing eventually evening out while his stayed ragged and shallow, and tried to convince himself that tomorrow would be better. It wasn't. The morning brought a call from Jennifer's lawyer, formal, condescending, reminding him that his current instability was being documented. Then the estate lawyer called to say there were more papers to sign, more hoops to jump through before he could list the property. Then the electricity flickered and died for 20 minutes, and Adrian discovered the circuit breaker box was a disaster of exposed wiring and jury-rigged repairs that probably violated every building code in existence. He was standing in his basement, staring at the electrical panel and trying not to scream, when he heard the knock. Adrian climbed the stairs to find Elena Voss on his front porch, still dressed like she was about to close a merger, holding a manila folder in one hand. She looked even more out of place in the daylight, too polished for a town this quiet, too composed for a neighborhood where half the houses needed paint. "I have the property survey," she said without preamble. "The fence line isn't where I thought it was." Adrian blinked. "Okay. It's 6 inches onto my property. Has been for decades, apparently." He waited for her to continue, to tell him what this meant in terms of legal liability or property value, or whatever billionaires worried about when boundaries were violated. Instead, she said, "So it's my responsibility to fix, technically." "You don't have to—" "I'm not doing it for you," Elena interrupted, her tone clipped. "I'm doing it because it's an eyesore and it's lowering my property value. But since it's on the line, I need your cooperation." Adrian leaned against the doorframe, too tired to decode whatever power dynamic was happening here. "What kind of cooperation?" "The contractors I use charge a fortune. If you're willing to do the labor, I'll cover the materials." He must have looked skeptical, because she added, "I'm not trying to be charitable. I'm trying to be efficient. You need it fixed. I need it fixed. And I'd rather not wait 3 weeks for someone to fit me into their schedule." It was possibly the least friendly offer of help Adrian had ever received, and yet somehow that made it easier to accept. No pity, no strings, just a transaction between two people who both wanted the same problem solved. "I don't know anything about building fences," he admitted. "There are tutorials online. You look reasonably competent." "Do I?" Elena's expression didn't change. "You're still standing. That's more than a lot of people manage." It shouldn't have felt like a compliment, but Adrian found himself almost smiling. "All right, yeah, I can do labor." "Good. I'll have the materials delivered tomorrow." She turned to leave, then paused. "Your daughter. She should stay clear of the property line until the fence is up. She's 8, not stupid." "I didn't say she was stupid. I said she should stay clear." And with that, Elena Voss walked away, leaving Adrian standing in the doorway, wondering what the hell had just happened. Mia thought the whole thing was hilarious. She just showed up and told you to build a fence? Basically. And you said yes? Adrian looked up from the pasta he was burning. The stove only had 2 working burners, and he'd somehow chosen the wrong ones. What was I supposed to say? "No, lady, build your own fence." "She's covering the materials. That's a few $100s we don't have to spend." Mia absorbed this with the gravity of someone who'd heard too many conversations about money. She shouldn't have had to think about it 8. "Is she mean?" "I don't think so. Just—" Adrian searched for the right word. "Direct. Aunt Jennifer is direct, and she's mean." "Aunt Jennifer isn't your aunt anymore," Adrian said, more sharply than he intended. "And she's not mean, she's just— we're not talking about her." Mia poked at her pasta, which was definitely burned. "This is gross, Dad." "Yeah, I know." They ate it anyway, sitting at the kitchen table that wobbled no matter how many folded napkins Adrian shoved under the legs. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the sky orange and pink in a way that felt almost aggressive in its beauty, like the universe was mocking him with evidence that nice things still existed. Can I go outside? Mia asked. It's almost dark. Just for a little bit, please. Adrian was too tired to argue. Stay in the yard. And I mean our yard, not, I know. Stay away from the fancy house. She was out the door before he could add anything else, and Adrian let her go because keeping her cooped up in this depressing house felt like its own kind of cruelty. He cleared their plates, paper, because he hadn't found where Martin kept the real dishes or if he'd even owned any, and went to the window to watch her. Mia was at the fence, peering through one of the gaps in the boards. Adrian moved to call her back, then stopped. On the other side, just barely visible, Elena Voss stood in her perfect yard, looking down at something Mia was holding up. A rock, Adrian realized. His daughter was showing the billionaire CEO a rock. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he watched Elena crouch down, actually crouch, in her expensive pants, to get a better look. Mia's mouth was moving a mile a minute, the way it did when she was excited about something, and Elena was nodding, her expression serious, like rock identification was a matter of international importance. Then Mia reached through the fence gap and handed the rock over. Elena took it, examined it with the same focus she'd probably applied to million-dollar contracts, and said something that made Mia laugh. Adrian felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, not quite relief, just a small loosening of the constant tension he'd been carrying. Maybe this place wasn't completely terrible. Maybe there were worse towns to be stuck in while his life fell apart. When Mia came back inside 10 minutes later, she was grinning. Elena knows about rocks, like really knows. She said this one has mica in it. Did she? And she said if I find any more interesting ones, I can show her. Mia, what? She offered. Adrian looked at his daughter, at the happiness on her face that had been so rare lately, and couldn't bring himself to warn her against getting attached. Maybe that made him a bad parent. Maybe he was supposed to protect her from disappointment, to remind her that they weren't staying, that nothing here was permanent. But she was 8, and she'd had a terrible year, and if looking at rocks with the neighbor made her smile, then Adrian was going to let it happen. Just don't bother her too much, he said. I won't. Mia paused. She's not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone meaner, maybe. She looks like she'd be mean. Don't judge people by how they look, Bug. You do it all the time. She had him there. Adrian ruffled her hair, pulling her into a hug she squirmed away from after exactly 3 seconds. Get ready for bed. I'll be up in a minute. Bashabantin. He watched her go, then turned back to the window. Elena's house was lit up like a showroom, all clean lines and warm light, so different from the dim, dusty cave he was standing in. She was probably in there right now, living her perfect life, completely unaware that she'd just made his daughter's entire week with 5 minutes of attention. Adrian didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know what to do with any of this. The house, the town, the strange woman next door who talked about property lines and mica deposits with equal seriousness. He was supposed to be sorting through his uncle's estate, getting the place ready to sell, then getting back to the city to fight for custody of his daughter. But standing there in the growing dark, watching the lights next door, and listening to Mia brushing her teeth upstairs, Adrian felt the first small crack in the plan he'd made, the first whisper of a question he didn't want to ask. What if they didn't go back? He shut it down immediately, because that was insane. There was nothing for them here. No job, no support system, no reason to upend their entire lives for a dead man's house in a town where they knew exactly one person. Jennifer would use it against him. His boss would fire him. They'd be starting from zero with even less than they had now. But the question lingered anyway, quiet and persistent, as Adrian climbed the stairs to tuck his daughter into bed. The materials arrived the next afternoon, a truck full of pressure-treated posts, boards, concrete mix, everything they'd need to replace the entire fence line. Adrian signed for it in a daze, wondering how much this would have cost if he'd had to pay for it, then spent an hour watching YouTube videos on fence construction while Mia did homework at the kitchen table. This looks hard, she said, peering over his shoulder at the screen. Yeah. Are you going to be able to do it? Probably not. Then why did you say you would? Adrian looked at her, at those serious eyes that saw too much. Because sometimes you have to try anyway. She thought about this. That's dumb. Yeah, well, welcome to adulthood. He started the next morning, measuring and marking post positions while Mia watched from the porch, offering commentary that was mostly accurate and entirely unhelpful. The ground was harder than he'd expected, and the post hole digger he'd borrowed from the hardware store in town felt like it was designed to punish him specifically. He was 2 holes in, sweating through his shirt despite the cool morning air, when Elena appeared on her side of the fence. "You're putting them too close together," she said. Adrian looked up, squinting against the sun. "What?" "The posts. They should be 8 feet apart, not 6. The tutorial said, "The tutorial is wrong, or you're following it wrong. Either way, those holes need to be further apart." She was probably right, which just made it more annoying. Adrian stabbed the post hole digger into the ground with more force than necessary. "You want to do it yourself?" "I want it done correctly." "Then maybe you should have hired professionals." Elena crossed her arms, and even through the broken fence, Adrian could feel the frost. "I gave you an option. If it's too difficult, it's not too difficult, it's just—" He stopped, taking a breath. "Sorry, you're right. I'll move them." Something in her posture softened slightly. "Do you need help?" The offer surprised him. "I thought you were paying me to do the labor." "I'm paying for materials. You're providing labor. But if you're going to do it wrong, I'd rather correct it now than have to fix it later." It was possibly the least gracious offer of assistance in human history, but Adrian found himself nodding anyway. "Yeah, okay. Help would be good." Elena disappeared for a moment, then returned in different clothes: jeans, a t-shirt that probably cost more than Adrian's entire wardrobe, work gloves that looked brand new. She stepped through the gap in the fence onto his property without asking permission and picked up the tape measure he'd been using. "Show me where you marked the others," she said. They spent the next hour redoing his measurements, and Adrian had to admit she knew what she was doing. Her movements were efficient, her decisions quick and certain. No wasted motion or second-guessing. She didn't talk much, just pointed and corrected and occasionally made small sounds of disapproval when he did something particularly stupid. "You've done this before, Adrian said, digging the 3rd corrected hole. "No." "Then how—" "I read the instructions, properly." "So did I." Elena glanced at him, and for the first time since they'd met, something like humor flickered across her face. "Sure you did." Mia appeared at the back door, drawn by the novelty of her father talking to another human being. "Are you helping him?" she called to Elena. "Supervising," Elena corrected. "That means helping," Mia said, coming down the porch steps. "Hi, I'm Mia. I know, you showed me a rock yesterday. Do you want to see more rocks? I found 3 new ones this morning." Adrian opened his mouth to tell her not to bother Elena, but Elena was already setting down the tape measure and turning to Mia with something that almost looked like interest. "What kind?" she asked. "I don't know. That's why I wanted to show you." And just like that, his daughter and his billionaire neighbor were crouched in the dirt, examining pebbles with the intensity of archaeologists on a dig. Adrian watched them, still holding the post hole digger, feeling like he'd stumbled into someone else's life by accident. "This one might be granite," Elena was saying. "See the different colored crystals?" "What are crystals?" "The shiny bits. Each one is a different mineral." Mia held the rock up to the light, squinting. "It's pretty. It's common. But pretty, yes." They went through each rock in Mia's collection, which she'd apparently stored in her pockets, while Adrian returned to digging holes, listening to Elena patiently explain igneous versus sedimentary weathering patterns, the difference between a rock and a mineral. She didn't talk down to Mia, didn't simplify things unnecessarily, just spoke to her like a person who was capable of understanding. "How do you know all this?" Mia asked. "I studied geology before business." "What's geology?" "The study of rocks and the earth." Mia's eyes went wide. "That's a real job." "It can be. I didn't stick with it." "Why not?" Elena was quiet for a moment, still holding one of Mia's rocks, her expression distant. "I don't know," she said finally. "I suppose I got distracted." There was something in her voice, not quite regret, but close to it, that made Adrian stop digging and look at her. She seemed smaller somehow, sitting in the dirt with his daughter, her perfect composure cracked just enough to show something human underneath. Then she stood, brushing off her jeans, the moment passing. I should get back to work. Do you have to? Mia asked. Yes, but you can show me more rocks another time. Really? If you find any actually interesting ones. No more granite. Mia beamed, and Adrian felt that shift in his chest again, that dangerous loosening. Say thank you, he prompted. Thank you, Elena. Elena nodded, already heading back toward the gap in the fence. She paused at the property line, looking back at Adrian. The post should be set in concrete by tonight. If you wait too long, the ground will dry out. Got it. And you'll need at least 2 more people to set the rails. They're too heavy for one person. I'll figure it out. She looked like she wanted to argue, then seemed to decide it wasn't worth the effort. Good luck, she said, and stepped back into her own pristine yard. Adrian watched her go, then looked down at Mia, who was still grinning. She's nice, Mia said. She's something, Adrian agreed and picked up the post hole digger again. Setting the posts took 3 days. Adrian worked in the early mornings before Mia woke up, and in the evenings after she went to bed, mixing concrete until his shoulders screamed, leveling posts until his eyes crossed. Elena appeared periodically, never offering to help directly, just pointing out when things were off-level or crooked, making small corrections that probably saved him hours of do-overs. On the 3rd day, while he was waiting for the concrete to cure, she brought over coffee. You look terrible, she said, handing him a travel mug through the fence gap. Thanks. You really know how to make a guy feel good. I'm not trying to make you feel good. I'm trying to keep you functional. She sipped her own coffee, watching him with that assessing look he was getting used to. When's the last time you slept? What day is it? Thursday. Then probably Tuesday. Elena frowned. That's not sustainable. Yeah, well, neither is my life, but here we are. It came out sharper than he'd intended, and Adrian immediately regretted it. But Elena just nodded, like he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. What are you running from? She asked. The question was so direct it caught him off guard. What makes you think I'm running from something? You showed up here with a child and a duffel bag, haven't left except to buy supplies, and you're working on this fence like your life depends on it. Either you're running from something or you're running towards something, and you don't seem like the type to run toward. Adrian drank his coffee, which was excellent. Peace. Adrian drank his, of course it was, and tried to decide how honest to be. Custody battle. Ex-wife thinks I'm unfit. Are you? Probably. I don't know. I'm trying not to be. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Elena considered this, her expression unreadable. The house, you're planning to sell it. That's the plan. And then what? Go back to the city and fight your ex-wife from an even weaker position? You got a better idea? Stay. Adrian laughed, a short, bitter sound. And do what? There's nothing for me here. There's a house, paid for. No rent, no mortgage. That's more than nothing. I don't have a job here. I don't know anyone except you, and I barely know you. So get a job. Meet people. Figure it out. Elena set her empty mug down on a fence post. You said you're trying not to be unfit. Maybe start by giving your daughter some stability instead of dragging her back to a place where you're obviously drowning. She said it like it was simple, like turning his entire life upside down was a rational decision instead of insanity. Adrian shook his head. It's not that easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. But you're already doing hard things badly. Maybe try doing different hard things well. And with that, she walked away again, leaving Adrian standing there with cooling coffee and a thought that wouldn't go away. That night, after Mia was asleep, Adrian sat at the kitchen table with his phone and started making lists. Reasons to go back to the city. Job, terrible but stable. Familiar, even if miserable. Close to Jennifer, for custody logistics. Reasons to stay. House, paid for. Lower cost of living. Mia seemed happier here, away from Jennifer's constant judgment. He looked at the list for a long time, then pulled up the job search sites he'd bookmarked. The town wasn't big, but it had a hospital, a few schools, some small businesses. There were openings, not many, and nothing great, but enough to make him think maybe, possibly, it wasn't completely impossible. His phone buzzed. Jennifer's lawyer again, asking for confirmation of his return date. Adrian stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Instead of answering, he closed the message and opened a new search. Family lawyers in the area. He didn't make any calls, didn't commit to anything. Just looked, gathering information, testing the shape of a possibility he wasn't ready to name. Outside, the fence posts stood in their concrete footings, solid and level, waiting for the rails that would connect them into something complete. Adrian looked at them through the window, thinking about foundations and frameworks, about the difference between running away and running toward. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe he was doing hard things badly. Maybe it was time to try something different. He didn't decide anything that night, but he didn't delete the lawyer search either, and when he finally went to bed, the lists were still on the table, waiting. The fence took another week to finish, and by the time Adrian hammered in the final board, something had shifted between him and Elena that neither of them acknowledged directly. She'd stopped pretending she was just supervising. He'd stopped pretending he didn't need the help. They worked in a rhythm that felt almost comfortable, him doing the heavy lifting, her making the adjustments that kept everything straight and level, both of them falling into silences that weren't entirely awkward. Mia had declared Elena her friend, which Elena accepted with the same serious consideration she gave everything else. She'd started leaving books on rocks and minerals on the fence posts for Mia to find, always with sticky notes marking relevant pages. Adrian would watch his daughter reading them in the backyard, sprawled in the grass with a focus that reminded him she was still just a kid, despite how grown-up she sometimes seemed. "I called a lawyer, here," Adrian said one afternoon, passing Elena a board to hold in place while he drilled pilot holes. Her hands didn't falter. "About the custody case?" "Yeah, someone local. She said I'd have a better shot if I could prove stable housing and employment. The house covers one. I'm working on the other. You're staying then?" It wasn't quite a question, but Adrian answered anyway. "I think so. Maybe. I don't know yet. That's not very decisive." "Yeah, well, I'm not very decisive these days." He lined up the drill, checked it twice, then made the hole. "What about you?" "What about me?" "You live in a house that could fit 20 people, alone. You're always working. You know everything about rocks, but gave it up for business. What are you running from?" Elena was quiet long enough that Adrian thought she might not answer it long. Then she said, "Expectations." "Whose?" "Everyone's, my father's, the board's, my own." She adjusted the board slightly, perfectly aligned without measuring. "I built something from nothing, made all the right moves, married the right kind of man, except none of it feels like mine anymore." Adrian looked at her across the fence, this woman in designer jeans who could probably buy his entire life 10 times over, looking more tired than he'd ever seen her. "You said married. Past tense?" "Engaged. Technically still engaged." She said it like she was describing a business contract, which maybe she was. "Richard Palmer. He's in finance. Very successful. Very suitable." Sounds romantic. "It's practical. We have complementary goals and compatible lifestyles." "Do you love him?" Elena met his eyes, and something in her expression cracked. "I don't think I know what that means anymore." Before Adrian could respond, Mia's voice cut through the yard. "Dad, phone!" He'd left it inside, and Jennifer had been calling more frequently as the days passed without him confirming a return date. Adrian wiped his hands on his jeans, already feeling the familiar dread settle in his stomach. "I should go," Elena said. "I'll finish this board." Adrian jogged toward the house, where Mia stood in the doorway holding his phone like it might bite her. "It's Aunt Jennifer," she whispered, and the fear in her voice made Adrian's chest tight. "She's not your aunt," he said again, softer this time. He took the phone, already ringing again, and answered. "Hello, Jennifer. Where the hell have you been?" No greeting, no pretense. That was Jennifer, straight to the attack. "I've been calling for 3 days. I've been busy." "Too busy to answer your phone? Too busy to respond to your lawyer?" "Adrian, we have court dates scheduled. You can't just disappear into whatever midlife crisis you're having and expect everything to wait." Adrian walked into the kitchen, putting distance between himself and Mia. "I'm not having a midlife crisis. I'm settling my uncle's estate. For 2 weeks. It's been almost a month. Things got complicated. Things are always complicated with you. That's the problem." He could hear the sharp click of her heels on tile. She was pacing, which meant she was angry. Actually angry, not just strategically aggressive. "When are you coming back?" I don't know yet. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. The silence on the other end was worse than yelling. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had gone cold and professional, the tone she used when she was done negotiating. My lawyer is filing a motion to revise the custody arrangement. If you're not back by next Friday with proof of employment and stable housing in the city, we're asking for full custody with supervised visitation. Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. You can't do that. I can, and I am. You're unstable, Adrian. You took our daughter across state lines without notifying me. You quit your job. I didn't quit. I took leave. You're living in a condemned house. It's not condemned. And you're clearly not capable of providing the structure Mia needs. So yes, I absolutely can do that. And I will. She paused, and when she continued, she paused, and when something in her voice had shifted to something almost genuine. This isn't about hurting you. This is about what's best for Mia. She deserves better than watching you fall apart. The worst part was that Adrian couldn't completely disagree. He had been falling apart. He had uprooted Mia on a half-formed plan with no clear endgame. He was working manual labor to fix a fence while sleeping 4 hours a night and making lists he was too scared to act on. But he was also watching Mia laugh more, hearing her talk about rocks and geology with genuine excitement, seeing her sleep through the night without nightmares about her parents screaming at each other through lawyers. I have stable housing, Adrian said. The house is mine, free and clear. In the middle of nowhere. In a good school district, low crime. Mia likes it here. Mia is 8. She doesn't get to decide. No, you do. You in whatever court you can buy with Richard's money. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Don't you dare! Friday, Adrian interrupted. You said Friday. I'll have everything in order by then. Adrian? He hung up before she could finish, before he could hear whatever combination of threat and concern she was about to deliver. His hands were shaking. He set the phone down carefully, afraid he'd throw it otherwise. Mia stood in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. Is she taking me away? No. Adrian crossed to her, kneeling down to her level. No, Bug. I'm not going to let that happen. But she said, I know what she said, but I'm working on it, okay? I'm figuring it out. What if you can't figure it out in time? That was the question, wasn't it? The one Adrian had been avoiding while he built a fence and made lists and pretended he had any control over the situation. He pulled Mia into a hug, feeling her thin arms wrap around his neck, and tried to sound more confident than he felt. I will, he said. I promise. It was a promise he had no idea how to keep. That evening, after Mia had gone to bed, Adrian sat on the back porch and tried to make a plan that wasn't complete fantasy. He had 6 days to prove he could provide stable employment and housing. The housing was covered, the house might need work, but it was structurally sound and legally his. Employment was the problem. He'd sent out resumes to every opening in the area, but most required specialized skills he didn't have or paid so little it would look worse than unemployment. You're spiraling. Adrian looked up to find Elena standing on her side of the fence. The finished fence, solid and straight, a barrier that somehow felt less absolute than the broken one had been. Is it that obvious? You've been sitting there for an hour without moving. Yes, it's obvious. She had a glass of wine in her hand, which was the most casual he'd ever seen her. What happened? Jennifer, my ex. She's filing for full custody if I don't prove I have my life together by Friday. Can you? Prove it? I don't know. Have it together? Definitely not. Elena sipped her wine, considering. What do you need? A job. A real one. Not day labor or gig work. Something with a salary and benefits that'll look good to a judge. What can you do? Adrian laughed, bitter. I can fix fences, apparently. Burn pasta. Make bad decisions. I've got a business degree I've never used and 5 years of project management experience in a field I hated, none of which translates to anything useful in a town this size. Project management is useful everywhere. Not when the only companies hiring are looking for people with specialized certifications I don't have. Elena was quiet, swirling her wine. Then she set the glass down on the fence post. What if I hired you? What? I need someone to manage a project. You need employment. It's practical. Adrian stood, crossing to the fence. You don't even know what I'm capable of. You built this fence. on time, under budget, while managing a child in a legal crisis. That's better project management than most of my current team. Elena, you can't just, that's what project? She hesitated, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. I'm buying out my fiancé's stake in my company. He's been a silent partner, but he wants to liquidate his assets for a merger I don't agree with. The transition needs to be managed carefully. Contracts renegotiated, partnerships restructured, public relations handled. It's a 6-month project, maybe longer, and you want me to manage it. I want someone who isn't already loyal to Richard or the board, someone I can trust to be direct and not play politics. She met his eyes. I realize this looks like charity. It is charity. It's self-interest. If I'm going to make this break, I need people around me who aren't invested in the old structure. You're the only person I know who has absolutely no stake in how this plays out. Adrian stared at her, trying to see the angle, the catch. There had to be one. People didn't just offer life-changing jobs to struggling single fathers they'd known for 3 weeks. Why are you really doing this? He asked. Elena picked up her wine glass again, not drinking, just holding it. Because I'm tired of making decisions based on what other people expect. And because you reminded me that sometimes the practical choice and the right choice are the same thing. She paused. Also, Mia deserves better than watching her father destroy himself trying to survive in a system designed to break him. It was the most honest thing she'd said to him. It was the most honest thing, and Adrian didn't know what to do with it. I'd be working for you. Yes. That's going to complicate things. Between us. What things? We barely know each other. But that wasn't quite true anymore, and they both knew it. Something had formed between them over the past weeks. Tentative, undefined, but real enough that adding employer-employee to the mix felt dangerous. I need to think about it, Adrian said. You have until Friday to prove employment. Today is Wednesday. Think fast. She was right, and he hated that she was right. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, trying to sort through the implications. If he took the job, he'd be tied to Elena in ways that went beyond neighborly fence repairs. He'd be dependent on her, obligated to her, trapped in whatever complicated situation she was extracting herself from. But if he didn't take it, he'd lose Mia. What's the salary? He asked. Elena named a number that made Adrian's vision blur. It was more than he'd made in the city, more than he'd thought possible in a town this size, enough to hire a real lawyer, enough to prove to any judge that he could provide for his daughter. That's too much, Mum, he said. That's market rate for project management with the scope I'm describing. If anything, it's low. Elena, do you want the job or not? Adrian looked at her across the fence. This woman who'd somehow become tangled in his life without either of them planning it, who was offering him exactly what he needed, wrapped in terms that made it seem like she needed it too. Maybe she did. Maybe this was as much about her trying to break free of something as it was about helping him. Yes, he said. I want the job. Something shifted in her expression. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction. Good. I'll have the contracts drawn up tomorrow. You can start Monday. Friday? I start Friday. I need to be able to show proof of employment by the court date. Friday, then. She finished her wine in one swallow. This doesn't change anything between us. Okay, I'm still your neighbor. We're still whatever this is. Okay? And Mia can still show me rocks. She'd riot if you stopped. Elena almost smiled. Then we have an understanding. Yeah, Adrian said, though he wasn't sure either of them understood anything. We do. The next morning, Elena's lawyer arrived with a contract that was surprisingly straightforward. 6-month initial term, renewable, benefits including health insurance that would cover Mia, clear delineation of responsibilities. Adrian read it twice, looking for traps, but found none. He signed it in Elena's kitchen, which was even more perfect up close. Marble counters, professional appliances, everything in its designated place. This is real, he said, more to himself than to Elena. Did you think I was joking? I thought I'd wake up and it would have been a stress dream. If this is a dream, I'm in it too, so we're both insane. She took the signed contract, sliding it into a folder. I'll file this with HR today. You'll have an offer letter by this afternoon. Just like that. Just like that. Adrian sat in her pristine kitchen, holding a cup of coffee she'd made in a machine that probably cost more than his car, and tried to process what had just happened. 2 days ago, he'd been on the verge of losing everything. Now he had a job, a house, and a chance at keeping his daughter. It didn't feel real. It felt like the kind of luck that couldn't possibly last. "What happens after 6 months?" he asked. "If the project finishes early, or if you decide you don't need me, we'll handle that when we get there, one crisis at a time." "You don't plan things out?" Elena's expression went dry. "I plan everything. But I've learned that sometimes the plan changes whether you want it to or not. The trick is knowing when to adapt." Is that what this is? Adaptation? For both of us, I think. Adrian's phone buzzed, his new lawyer, confirming she'd received the employment contract and would file it with the court immediately. Everything was moving so fast, pieces falling into place with a precision that felt almost orchestrated. "Thank you," he said, the words inadequate for what Elena had just done. "I know you said this is practical, but thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This project is going to be harder than building a fence. Richard doesn't let go of anything without a fight." "Your fiancé." "My former fiancé, as of about," she checked her watch, 3 hours ago. Adrian set down his coffee cup. "You broke it off." "Well, I told him I was buying out his stake and ending the engagement. He took it about as well as expected." She said it calmly, but Adrian could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands weren't quite steady. "He'll make this difficult, professionally and personally." "Do you want to talk about it?" "No. I want to work. That's what I do when things get complicated. I work." Adrian understood that. Work was the thing that made sense when everything else was chaos. It was easier to focus on tasks and deadlines than to deal with the mess underneath. "Then let's work," he said. They spent the next 3 hours going through files Elena had pulled together: contracts, partnership agreements, financial statements. Richard Palmer's name was everywhere, woven into the structure of Elena's company in ways that would take months to untangle. He'd invested early, when she was just starting out, and used that investment to secure influence over major decisions. On paper, it was a standard investor relationship. In practice, it was control. "He's going to claim I'm breaching our agreement," Elena said, spreading documents across her dining room table. The engagement was part of the understanding when he invested, not legally, but everyone knew. "Yes. So when I end it, he'll argue that I'm acting in bad faith, that I used him for his connections and capital." "Did you?" Elena looked up sharply. "Yes. And he used me for my company and my reputation. We were both very clear about what we were getting. The difference is I'm willing to pay fair market value to exit. He's going to want blood." Adrian studied the documents, seeing the complexity she was describing. This wasn't just a business transaction. It was a war, and Elena had just fired the opening shot by hiring him. "Why me?" he asked again. "You could hire someone with experience in corporate restructuring, someone who knows this world." "Because everyone who knows this world knows Richard. They've worked with him, need him for future deals, or are afraid of what he can do to their careers." She tapped one of the contracts. "You're not afraid of him. You don't need anything from him. And you're desperate enough to fight dirty if necessary." "That's a terrible recommendation." "It's an honest one." Adrian couldn't argue with that. He was desperate. And if Richard Palmer wanted to make Elena's life difficult, Adrian was more than willing to make it difficult right back. He'd been fighting Jennifer's lawyers for months. He knew how to operate from a position of weakness and still find leverage. "All right," he said. "Show me what we're working with." They worked until Mia came home from the library where Adrian had signed her up for a summer reading program. She burst through Elena's front door without knocking. Apparently they were past formalities, holding a book about gemstones. "Elena, look, they have a whole section on rocks." Elena glanced up from the contract she was reviewing, her expression softening in the way it only did around Mia. "Did you check it out?" "All 6 of them. The librarian said I could keep them for 2 weeks. Mama. 6 books on rocks. That's ambitious. I want to know everything." Mia dumped her backpack and climbed into the chair next to Elena, oblivious to the thousands of dollars in legal documents she was nearly sitting on. "What are you doing?" "Working," Adrian said. "Adult stuff." "Boring adult stuff?" "Very boring." Mia made a face, already losing interest. Can I go look for rocks in the backyard? Our backyard, Adrian clarified, not Elena's. But Elena's backyard has better rocks. Elena's backyard is Elena's property. Actually, Elena said, I don't mind, as long as she doesn't dig up the garden beds. Well, Mia looked at Adrian with the expression of someone who'd just won a major victory. See? She doesn't mind. Go, Adrian said, before this turned into a full negotiation. Be back before dinner. Mia grabbed her library books and disappeared into the backyard, leaving Adrian and Elena in sudden quiet. You're good with her, eh? Adrian said. I just answer her questions. Children appreciate honesty. Most adults find her questions exhausting. Most adults are idiots. Elena returned to the contract, but there was something different in her posture, less rigid than before. She's a good kid. You're doing something right. Coming from Elena, who never gave compliments lightly, it hit harder than it should have. Adrian looked down at the document spread between them, at this strange partnership they'd formed, and felt something shift that he wasn't ready to name. We should probably set some boundaries, he said, if we're working together. What kind of boundaries? Professional ones. Boss and employee, not whatever this is. Elena met his eyes, and for a moment neither of them looked away. And what is this? I don't know. That's why we need boundaries. Boundaries are for people who can't control themselves. Can you? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was willing to unpack. Elena broke eye contact first, returning to her documents with deliberate focus. We're neighbors, she said. Business associates. That's the extent of it. Right. Anything else would be complicated. Extremely complicated. So we agree. Completely. Neither of them believed it, but they went back to work anyway, building careful walls around something that was already leaking through the cracks. Friday arrived faster than Adrian was ready for. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, wearing a suit he'd borrowed from the one lawyer in town who was roughly his size, trying to look like someone who had his life together. The employment contract was in his briefcase. The house deed was in his briefcase. Character references from the librarian, the hardware store owner, and Elena, typed on company letterhead that looked impressively official, were in his briefcase. On paper, he looked stable, responsible, exactly the kind of father who deserved custody. In reality, he was terrified. You look weird, Mia said from the doorway. It's called professional. It's weird. You never wear ties. I'm wearing one today. He fumbled with the knot, which he'd tied and retied 4 times and still looked crooked. How do I look? Like you're going to court. I am going to court. Mia came into the bathroom, her expression serious. Are you scared? Adrian thought about lying, about being the strong parent who never showed fear. But Mia had lived through too much dishonesty between him and Jennifer to buy it. Yeah, Bug. I'm scared. What if they say I have to live with Aunt Jennifer? Then we'll figure it out, but I don't think that's going to happen. How do you know? Because I'm not giving up. Whatever the judge says today, I'm going to keep fighting until we can stay together. Saz. Mia was quiet, processing. Then she stepped forward and fixed his tie, her small fingers surprisingly deft. Elena showed me how. She said you'd probably mess it up. Adrian felt his throat tighten. She was right. The courthouse was 2 hours away, in the county seat where Jennifer had filed the original custody petition. Adrian's lawyer, Sarah Chen, 45, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, met him in the parking lot and walked him through what to expect. Jennifer would make her case. Adrian would make his. The judge would ask questions. Then they'd wait while he decided Mia's future. The employment contract is good, Sarah said, reviewing the documents one last time. The house deed is good. The character references are solid. You're in better shape than I expected. But Jennifer's lawyer is going to paint you as unstable. They'll focus on the sudden move, the career change, the fact that you've known your employer for less than a month. They'll make it sound impulsive and risky. It was impulsive and risky. Yes, but we're going to frame it as decisive and responsible. You saw an opportunity to provide better for your daughter, and you took it. That's good parenting, not instability. Adrian wanted to believe her. But when he walked into the courtroom and saw Jennifer sitting at the opposite table, perfectly composed, professionally dressed, radiating the kind of put-together confidence he'd never managed, all his certainty evaporated. Her lawyer was exactly what Adrian had expected. Mid-50s, expensive suit, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He laid out Jennifer's case with surgical precision. Adrian had quit his job without notice, removed Mia from her school mid-year, relocated to an unfamiliar town with no support system, and was now employed by someone he barely knew in a position that could disappear at any moment. "My client isn't questioning Mr. Cole's love for his daughter," the lawyer said, his tone suggesting he absolutely was. "But love isn't enough. Mia needs stability, structure, the ability to rely on her environment. Mr. Cole's recent actions demonstrate a pattern of impulsive decision-making that doesn't serve his daughter's best interests." Sarah countered with the facts: stable housing, gainful employment, a town with excellent schools, and low crime rates. She presented Elena's reference letter, which was glowing in the precise, measured way that somehow made it more credible. She pointed out that Mia was thriving in her new environment, that Adrian had maintained all her medical appointments and educational requirements. "What my opposing counsel calls impulsive, I call adaptive," Sarah argued. Mr. Cole recognized that their previous situation was unsustainable and took action to improve it. That's not instability. That's responsible parenting. The judge listened to both sides with the kind of neutral expression that gave nothing away. He was older, probably close to retirement, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart in this room. "Mr. Cole," he said finally, "tell me about this job." Adrian stood, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm managing a corporate restructuring project for Voss Technologies. It's a 6-month contract with option to renew. And you've known Ms. Voss for how long?" "About a month." "That's not very long to build a professional relationship." "No, sir, but she's seen my work firsthand. I rebuilt the fence between our properties, managed the project from planning to execution under budget and ahead of schedule. She felt that demonstrated the skills she needed." The judge made a note. "And if this contract ends in 6 months, what's your plan?" Adrian had thought about this, rehearsed answers with Sarah. But standing there with Jennifer's lawyer waiting to pounce on any uncertainty, he found himself telling the truth instead. "I don't know, sir, but that's true of any job. What I do know is that Mia is happier and more secure than she's been in years. She's sleeping through the night. She's excited about school. She's making friends. Whatever happens with my employment, I'm not going to sacrifice that stability by dragging her back to a situation that was making both of us miserable." Jennifer's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, that's exactly the kind of—" "I didn't ask you," the judge said mildly. "Sit down." The lawyer sat. The judge looked at Adrian for a long moment, then at Jennifer, then back down at the files in front of him. "I'm going to take a 15-minute recess. When I come back, I'll have a decision." Those 15 minutes felt like hours. Adrian sat in the hallway with Sarah, not talking, just waiting. Jennifer stayed in the courtroom with her lawyer. They didn't look at each other when Adrian walked past. When the judge returned, his expression was still unreadable. "I've reviewed the evidence," he said. "Both parties clearly love their daughter and want what's best for her. The question is whether Mr. Cole's recent changes represent instability or appropriate adaptation to new circumstances." Adrian's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs. "Having considered the facts," the judge continued, "I'm going to maintain the current custody arrangement with one modification. Mr. Cole will have primary physical custody. Ms. Hartwell will have visitation every other weekend and alternating holidays. This order will be reviewed in 6 months to ensure continued stability." Adrian heard the words but couldn't quite process them. Primary custody. He'd won. "However," the judge added, and Adrian's heart stopped. "Mr. Cole, if your employment situation changes or if there are any significant disruptions to Mia's schooling or living arrangements, I want to know immediately. Ms. Hartwell has the right to petition for modification if circumstances change. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Then we're done here." Yes. The gavel came down, and Adrian felt something break loose in his chest. Relief so intense, it was almost painful. Sarah was shaking his hand, talking about next steps and paperwork, but Adrian couldn't focus on anything except the fact that Mia was his. Still his. For now. Jennifer left without speaking to him. Her lawyer looked annoyed but unsurprised. Adrian signed the documents Sarah put in front of him, barely reading them, just wanting this to be over. In the parking lot, Sarah said, "You did good in there." "I told the truth." "That doesn't always work. Today it did." She closed her briefcase. "Keep me updated on the employment situation. If anything changes, I need to know before Jennifer's lawyer does." "I will, thank you." She drove off, and Adrian stood alone in the parking lot, still wearing the borrowed suit, still holding the briefcase full of evidence that his life was finally moving in the right direction. He called Mia from the car. "Hey, Bug." "What happened?" "We won." Her scream of joy nearly deafened him, and Adrian found himself laughing, the sound surprising him with how genuine it felt. "You're stuck with me." "Good. I didn't want to live with Aunt Jennifer anyway." "Don't call her that." "Sorry, I didn't want to live with Jennifer." "Better. I'll be home in 2 hours." "Want me to pick up pizza?" "Can we afford pizza?" The question hurt, because Mia shouldn't have to think about whether they could afford a $10 meal. But she was right to ask. Money had been tight for so long that splurging felt dangerous. "Yeah," Adrian said, "we can afford pizza." He stopped at the grocery store on the way back and bought actual ingredients instead of the frozen dinners they'd been living on. Vegetables. Fresh pasta. Ingredients for a real meal. It felt extravagant and necessary in equal measure. A way of marking the day as different, important, the start of something new. Elena was in her yard when Adrian pulled into the driveway. She didn't ask about the court date, just looked at him across the fence and raised her eyebrows. "We won," Adrian said. Something in her face relaxed. "Good. I couldn't have done it without the job offer." "You earned the job. I just gave you the opportunity." "Still, thank you." Elena nodded, accepting it. "Mia's been checking the driveway every 10 minutes. You should probably go tell her before she wears a path in the grass." Adrian found his daughter on the front porch, and the look on her face when she saw him, pure relief and joy, made everything they'd been through worth it. She crashed into him hard enough to knock him back a step, and Adrian held her tight, breathing in the smell of her shampoo and grass and the chocolate she'd probably eaten while he was gone. "We're okay," he said into her hair. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in months, he actually believed it. The victory lasted exactly 3 days before Richard Palmer made his first move. Adrian was in Elena's office, a converted sunroom at the back of her house that overlooked the garden, when her phone lit up with an alert from her company's legal team. She read it twice, her expression going from neutral to carefully blank, in a way that made Adrian's stomach drop. "What is it?" "Richard filed an injunction blocking the buyout. He's claiming I violated our partnership agreement by hiring you without board approval." Adrian set down the contract he'd been reviewing. "Can he do that?" "He can file anything he wants. Whether it holds up is another question." Elena forwarded the document to her laptop, scanning through the legal language with the focus of someone who'd done this before. "It's harassment more than substance. He knows I don't need board approval for hiring decisions. But it ties things up, makes everything take longer." "How much longer?" "Weeks, maybe months, depending on how far he wants to push it." Adrian watched her face, seeing the tension she was trying to hide. This was exactly what she'd predicted Richard would do. But knowing something was coming didn't make it easier when it arrived. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. "Nothing yet. Let me handle the legal response." She closed the laptop, rubbing her temples. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." "How much worse?" Richard doesn't lose gracefully. When he realizes he can't win through the courts, he'll go after reputation instead. Mine, the company's, anyone associated with this transition. She looked at Adrian directly. "Including yours." "I don't have a reputation to damage. You have a custody arrangement that's contingent on stability. If Richard can make you look like a liability, it gives your ex-wife ammunition." The thought hadn't occurred to Adrian, and now that it had, he couldn't shake it. Jennifer's lawyer was already looking for reasons to challenge the custody decision. If Richard started spreading rumors about Adrian's employment being illegitimate or improper, it would land right in their lap. "So what do I do?" "Your job. Document everything. Keep your head down and don't give him anything to work with." Elena stood, pacing to the window. And be prepared for him to try to make this personal. Personal how? He'll dig into your background, your divorce, your finances, your relationship with me. He'll look for anything that makes you look like an opportunist who used your proximity to manipulate your way into a position you're not qualified for. But that's exactly what Jennifer's lawyer was already arguing. Then we make sure the evidence says otherwise. Your work needs to be flawless. No mistakes, no shortcuts, nothing that suggests you got this job through anything except merit. Adrian heard the subtext clearly. They needed to maintain perfect professional distance no matter what was actually developing between them. The fence building, the late-night conversations, Mia's rock collection growing on Elena's porch, all of it needed to stay carefully separate from the work relationship. Understood, Adrian said. Elena turned from the window, and something in her expression had shifted to the person she was in boardrooms. Controlled, strategic, untouchable. I need you to prepare a full audit of Richard's involvement in every active project. I want documentation of every decision he influenced, every contract he touched, every board vote he swayed. If he's going to claim I can't function without him, I'm going to prove he's been a liability for years. It was a massive undertaking, the kind of project that would require weeks of digging through files and interviewing staff who might not want to talk. Adrian nodded anyway. I'll start today. But be discreet. Richard still has allies in the company. If word gets back to him that we're building a case, he'll start covering his tracks. Who can I trust? Elena considered. Margaret in accounting. She's been with me since the beginning and has no patience for Richard's financial games. Thomas in operations. He's reported to me directly, and Richard tried to get him fired twice for refusing to cut corners. And Sarah Kim in PR. But approach her carefully. She's loyal, but she's also risk-averse. Adrian made notes, already thinking through how to structure the audit without raising alarms. What about the board? How many are in Richard's pocket? 3 out of 7, firmly. 2 are neutral and will side with whoever looks strongest. 2 are mine. Elena's mouth tightened. It's not a comfortable margin. Do we need to flip the neutral ones? Eventually, but first we need to prove I can execute this transition without the company falling apart. Results matter more than politics. The plan was sound, logical, exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had built Elena's company from nothing. But Adrian could see the cost in her posture, the way she held herself like she was bracing for impact. How long were you and Richard together? He asked. Elena's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise or annoyance. That's not relevant. You were engaged to him. You built a business partnership with him. That's not nothing. It was transactional. We both knew that. Did you? She was quiet for long enough that Adrian thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, 5 years. We met at a conference. He was already successful. I was just starting out. He saw potential in what I was building and offered to invest. The engagement came 2 years later, after we'd proven the partnership worked. Did you love him? I thought I did, or I thought what we had was close enough to love that it didn't matter. Elena crossed her arms, defensive. He was brilliant and ambitious, and we wanted the same things. That felt like enough. And now? Now I know the difference. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither was willing to unpack. Adrian looked down at his notes, needing somewhere safe to direct his attention. I should get started on the audit, he said. Adrian, it's fine, professional boundaries, I get it. That's not what Elena stopped, reset. This situation is complicated enough without us making it worse. Agreed. So we keep things clear, boss and employee. Absolutely. Neither of them moved. Outside, Mia's voice drifted through the window. She was in the garden, talking to herself while examining something she'd found. The sound of her happiness was a sharp contrast to the tension in the room. She's been good for me, Elena said quietly. Mia, she reminds me that not everything has to be strategic. She's good at that. I'm going to miss her when, Elena caught herself. If things change, they're not going to change. We're staying. You can't know that. No, but I'm going to act like I can. Elena met his eyes, and for a moment the careful walls dropped enough that Adrian could see the exhaustion underneath. She was fighting battles on multiple fronts. Richard, the board, her own doubts about walking away from a relationship that had defined her professional life for years. And now she'd added Adrian and Mia to the equation, two more variables she couldn't completely control. "I should let you work," she said finally. Adrian gathered his notes and left, resisting the urge to say something that would make things more complicated than they already were. The professional distance Elena needed was probably smart, definitely necessary. But it felt like a retreat from something that had been slowly building, and Adrian wasn't sure either of them actually wanted to retreat. The audit took 3 weeks and confirmed what Elena had suspected. Richard's fingerprints were on every major decision the company had made in the past 5 years, and not all of them were good. He'd pushed aggressive expansion into markets that hadn't panned out, blocked investments in research that could have kept them ahead of competitors, and systematically undermined anyone who questioned his judgment. Adrian documented it all, building a paper trail that was damning in its cumulative weight. Margaret in accounting had been especially helpful, pulling financial records that showed how Richard had funneled resources toward his pet projects while starving divisions that didn't align with his vision. Thomas in operations provided emails where Richard had explicitly ordered him to ignore safety protocols to meet deadlines. "This is worse than I thought," Adrian told Elena, spreading the evidence across her dining room table. They were working late again, Mia asleep upstairs in the guest room that had become her unofficial second bedroom. "He's been running the company like his personal investment vehicle." "I know, I've known for a while." Elena studied the documents, her expression grim. "I told myself it was the cost of his capital and connections, that I could manage around his worst instincts." "Why did you stay with him?" "Because leaving felt like admitting failure. Because I'd built so much of the company's success story around our partnership that walking away would undermine all of it." She picked up one of the emails, reading it again. "Shibisham, and because some part of me believed I owed him. He took a risk on me when no one else would. That doesn't give him the right to sabotage your company." "No, but it makes it harder to fight him without feeling guilty." Adrian understood that. The weight of obligation, even when the person you felt obligated to didn't deserve it. He'd felt the same way about Jennifer for months, trying to preserve something that was already broken because ending it felt like giving up. "What's the next move?" he asked. "I present this to the board. Make the case that buying Richard out isn't just about ending our engagement. It's about removing a liability that's been holding the company back." Elena's hand tightened on the document. "They won't want to hear it. Richard has cultivated relationships with most of them, but the evidence doesn't lie." "When?" "The next board meeting is in 2 days. I'll need everything compiled into a presentation by then. 2 days to turn 3 weeks of investigation into a coherent narrative that would convince skeptical board members to turn on someone they'd worked with for years." It was barely enough time, but Adrian had learned that Elena operated best under pressure. "I'll have it ready," he said. They worked through the night, building slides and rehearsing arguments. Elena was meticulous, anticipating every objection and preparing counter-evidence. Adrian watched her transform from the woman who sat in the garden with Mia, examining rocks, to the CEO who'd built a company through sheer force of will. Both versions were real, but this one was armored in a way the other wasn't. At 3 in the morning, Elena made coffee while Adrian organized the final charts. She came back with 2 mugs and sat across from him, looking more tired than he'd ever seen her. "I'm scared," she said. The admission surprised him. Elena didn't do vulnerable, didn't show weakness, didn't admit to feeling anything that might be perceived as doubt. "Of Richard?" Adrian asked. "Of what happens after. If the board sides with me, I'm committing to running this company completely on my own terms. No safety net, no partner to blame if things go wrong. Just me and my decisions." "Ooh, you've been doing that already." "Richard wasn't helping, he was interfering." "I know, but there's a difference between knowing you could do it alone and actually doing it." Adrian set down his coffee, giving her his full attention. "You're one of the smartest, most capable people I've ever met. You'll figure it out. What if I don't? Then you'll fail and rebuild. That's what people do." Elena almost smiled. "Is that what you did? Fail and rebuild?" "I'm still in the failing part. Ask me about rebuilding in 6 months. You're doing better than you think. So are you." They sat in the quiet of her kitchen, surrounded by evidence of corporate malfeasance and strategic planning, and for a moment it felt almost normal, like they were just 2 people trying to navigate impossible situations and somehow ending up in the same place. "I should check on Mia," Adrian said, standing. She's fine. I looked in on her an hour ago. You did? She kicked off her blankets. I put them back. The image of Elena tucking in his daughter hit Adrian harder than it should have. It was such a small thing, almost automatic, but it spoke to something neither of them had acknowledged. How completely Mia had been absorbed into Elena's life and how much Elena had let her in. Thank you, he said. She's a good kid. She deserves someone looking out for her. She has me. I know, but sometimes it takes a village, right? Elena stood, collecting their empty mugs. You should get some sleep. We have a long day tomorrow. Adrian wanted to say something about what was happening between them, about how professional boundaries were becoming increasingly theoretical. But Elena was already moving toward the kitchen, putting distance between them, and maybe that was answer enough. He went upstairs to the guest room and found Mia sprawled across the bed exactly as Elena had described. Blankets on the floor, one arm hanging off the edge, completely unconscious in the way only children could manage. Adrian covered her again, watching her sleep, and tried not to think about how much they both needed this to work out. The board meeting was a controlled disaster. Elena presented the audit findings with precision and clarity, walking through Richard's pattern of poor decisions and self-serving choices. The evidence was overwhelming, the conclusion inevitable. Richard Palmer had been a liability disguised as an asset, and removing him was in the company's best interest. The board listened in stony silence. Richard, attending via video conference since he'd been excluded from the physical meeting, responded with wounded dignity and carefully constructed outrage. He painted Elena as ungrateful, emotional, making rash decisions because of a failed relationship. He suggested that her judgment was compromised, that she was lashing out, that the audit was a selective interpretation of data taken out of context. Elena and I built this company together, Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of betrayed partnership. I've stood by her through every challenge, every setback. And this is how she repays that loyalty? By manufacturing evidence to justify pushing me out? The evidence isn't manufactured, Elena countered, her voice level. It's documented fact. Your decisions have cost this company millions in failed ventures and missed opportunities. Ventures we decided on together, opportunities we passed on together. You're rewriting history to fit your narrative. One of the neutral board members, Martin Chen, who ran a venture capital firm and had invested early, spoke up. Elena, these findings are concerning, but Richard makes a fair point. Many of these decisions had your approval at the time, because I trusted his judgment. I've since learned that trust was misplaced. Or you're looking for someone to blame for choices you now regret, Richard said smoothly. We all make mistakes, Elena, but trying to pin yours on me isn't going to fix anything. Adrian watched from the back of the room where Elena had positioned him as project manager and witness. He could see her losing ground, the narrative slipping away from facts and into perception. Richard was better at this game, more practiced at manipulating boardroom politics. The financial data speaks for itself, Elena tried again, pulling up the charts Adrian had prepared. Richard's initiatives have consistently underperformed while divisions he opposed have exceeded targets. Correlation isn't causation, sure, Richard replied. Market conditions, timing, countless other factors influence outcomes. You can't reduce complex business decisions to a simple good or bad binary. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Richard was giving them an out, a way to avoid taking sides by claiming the situation was too complicated to judge definitively. Elena could see it happening, her carefully built case dissolving into ambiguity. I'm not asking you to take sides, she said, switching tactics. I'm asking you to approve a straightforward business transaction. I'm buying out Richard's stake at fair market value. He gets a return on his investment. The company moves forward. Everyone wins. Except you're forcing the sale against my will, Richard interjected. That's not a transaction. It's a hostile takeover of my own investment. You have the option to keep your stake and remain a silent partner with no operational input. That's not what I signed up for. Then take the buyout and move on. Oh, not at the price you're offering. My stake is worth significantly more than your valuation. And there it was, the real fight. Richard didn't want to leave. He wanted to extract maximum value by making Elena's life difficult until she agreed to terms that would cripple her financially. The meeting dragged on for another hour. circling the same arguments without resolution. Finally, the board chair, Patricia Odom, who'd been with the company since year 2, called for a vote on whether to approve the buyout at Elena's proposed valuation. The result was 4-3 against. Elena's face remained professionally neutral, but Adrian saw her hands tighten on the edge of the table. She'd lost. Not permanently. This wasn't the end of the fight, but definitively enough that Richard could claim victory. "This isn't over," Elena said as the meeting adjourned. "No," Patricia agreed quietly, "but you're going to need a better strategy than scorched earth. The board wants this resolved, but not at the cost of company stability." After everyone had left, Elena sat alone in the conference room, staring at the presentation that hadn't been enough. Adrian waited until the silence became unbearable before speaking. "What now?" Now Richard makes his counteroffer, which will be astronomical and designed to force me to either bankrupt myself or back down. Elena closed her laptop with controlled precision. "And I'll have to decide which option destroys me less. There has to be another way. If there is, I haven't found it." Adrian had never seen her look defeated before. Tired, yes. Frustrated, certainly. But this was different. This was someone realizing they might actually lose a fight they couldn't afford to lose. "Come on," he said. "You need to get out of here. I have work. You have nothing that can't wait until tomorrow. Come on." He expected her to argue, but Elena just nodded and followed him out of the building. They drove in silence back to the neighborhood, and instead of going to their respective houses, Adrian led her to the fence they'd built together. "Why are we standing at a fence?" Elena asked. "Because this is something we finished, something that actually worked out." Adrian leaned against the solid wood, testing its strength. "You said I needed to see that I could do hard things. Maybe you need the reminder too." Elena looked at the fence, straight, level, exactly what it was supposed to be, and something in her expression cracked. "I thought ending things with Richard would feel like freedom," she said. "Instead, it just feels like I'm back where I started. Alone and fighting to prove I deserve what I've built." "You're not alone. Adrian, I know. Professional boundaries, boss and employee. I get it." He turned to face her. "But you hired me when I had nothing. You vouched for me when nobody else would. You covered your fence in rocks because it makes my kid happy. So yeah, professionally we have boundaries. But as your neighbor, as your friend, whatever this is, you're not alone in this fight." Elena stared at him, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had gone unstable. Adrian hugged her back, feeling her shake with exhaustion or frustration, or maybe just the relief of not having to hold everything together for 1 minute. They stood there on the fence while the sun set behind them, two people who'd stumbled into each other's disasters and somehow made them slightly less impossible. "Thank you," Elena said finally, stepping back. "For what?" "For being exactly what I needed when I needed it. Right back at you." She almost smiled. "I should go. Figure out my next move." "Elena, I'm not giving up. I'm just regrouping." Adrian watched her walk back to her house, her posture straightening with each step, the armor sliding back into place. Whatever moment they'd just shared, it was already being tucked away, relegated to the category of things they weren't ready to examine. He went inside to find Mia at the kitchen table, doing homework with the intense focus she brought to everything. She looked up when he entered. "Did Elena win?" "Not today." "Is she sad?" "Yeah, Bug. She's sad." Mia processed this, her expression serious. "Should we bring her rocks? Rocks make people feel better?" Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Maybe tomorrow. I think she needs some space tonight." "Okay." Mia returned to her homework, already accepting what adults struggled with. That sometimes people needed to be sad alone before they could be okay with others. Adrian's phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer's lawyer. His chest went cold before he even read it. "We've been made aware of concerns regarding your current employment situation. Please provide documentation that your position with Voss Technologies was obtained through legitimate means and is not contingent on personal relationships with your employer. Failure to provide satisfactory evidence within 72 hours will result in a motion to modify custody arrangements." So Richard had made good on his threat faster than expected. He'd gone after Adrian's reputation, and somehow word had gotten back to Jennifer's legal team already. Adrian sat down heavily at the table, reading the message again. 72 hours to prove his job wasn't a favor from a woman he was getting too close to. 72 hours to document something that was technically true but looked exactly like what they were accusing him of. "Dad, you okay?" He looked up at Mia, at her worried face, and forced a smile that felt like a lie. "Yeah, Bug. Just work stuff." "Is it bad?" "It's manageable." She didn't believe him, but she let it go, returning to her math problems while Adrian tried to figure out how to prove that the best thing that had happened to him in years wasn't too good to be true. He texted Elena. "Richard contacted Jennifer's lawyer. They want proof my employment is legitimate." Her response came immediately. "I'll have HR prepare a full documentation package. Employment history, job posting, interview notes, everything. You'll have it by morning." There were no interview notes. "You offered me the job at the fence." "Then we'll create interview notes that reflect the conversation we had. Date them appropriately. Make it official." "Elena, this is business, Adrian. Sometimes the truth needs better packaging." He knew she was right. Knew that in the world she operated in, perception mattered more than reality, and documentation was power. But it still felt like they were building a house of cards, and Richard was coming with matches. "Okay?" he typed. "Thank you. We're in this together now. His fight with me is your fight too. I'm not going to let him destroy you to get to me." Adrian set down his phone and looked at Mia, still working through her homework with single-minded focus. She deserved better than being caught in the middle of adult wars she didn't understand. She deserved stability and peace, and a father who wasn't constantly scrambling to keep their lives from falling apart. For a moment, Adrian let himself imagine what would happen if he just gave up. Took Richard's pressure and Jennifer's threats as a sign that he should retreat, go back to the city, accept whatever custody arrangement would keep Mia safe, even if it meant seeing her less. Then Mia looked up and smiled at him, completely trusting, absolutely certain that he'd figure it out because he always did. And Adrian knew he couldn't walk away. Not from this town, not from this house, and not from whatever complicated thing was developing between him and Elena. He'd made a promise to Mia that they'd stay together, and he'd made a promise to himself that he'd stop running from hard things. Time to keep both promises, no matter what Richard Palmer threw at them. The documentation package Elena's HR department prepared was thorough enough to survive an audit from the IRS, let alone Jennifer's lawyer. Job posting dated 2 weeks before Adrian's hire, interview notes that referenced his project management experience, and the fence as a practical demonstration of his skills. Performance reviews from his first month that were glowing but measured. Everything was technically accurate, just retroactively formalized in a way that made the organic reality of how he'd been hired look properly bureaucratic. Adrian submitted it with a cover letter from Sarah Chen, explaining that small companies often had informal hiring processes that were later documented for HR compliance. It was the truth wrapped in language designed to bore lawyers into acceptance. Jennifer's legal team went quiet for a week. Then they requested a deposition. "They want to question you under oath about the circumstances of your employment," Sarah explained over the phone. "It's intimidation more than substance, but you'll need to be prepared." "Prepared how?" "Prepared to tell the truth without volunteering information they don't ask for. Prepared to stay calm when they try to rattle you. Prepared to make it incredibly boring so they lose interest and move on." Adrian spent the next 3 days being coached by Sarah on how to answer questions like a robot. "Yes, no, I don't recall. Could you rephrase that?" Elena sat in on one of the prep sessions, listening with the same focus she brought to board meetings. "They're going to ask about our relationship," she said when Sarah stepped out to take a call. "What do I say?" "The truth. We're neighbors. You worked on a project for me. I was impressed. I hired you. We maintain professional boundaries." "Do we?" Elena looked at him, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with professional boundaries. "We're trying to. Not very hard." "No, not very hard." She stood, pacing to the window in her office. "Richard knows. He's not stupid. He can see what's developing between us, and he's going to use it." "There's nothing to use. We haven't—" Adrian stopped, because finishing that sentence felt like a lie even though it was technically true. They hadn't crossed any obvious lines. But they'd been circling something for weeks, and everyone close enough to notice could see it. "It doesn't matter what we have or haven't done," Elena said. "It matters what it looks like. And it looks like I hired my neighbor who I've been getting close to, which gives Richard exactly the ammunition he needs to claim I'm making emotional decisions. So what do? We stick to the facts. We don't give them anything to twist. Elena turned back to him, and her expression had gone to the place where she made hard choices. And we accept that this situation is temporary. When the project ends, our professional relationship ends. Clean break. Adrian felt something drop in his chest. You're firing me in 6 months. But I'm honoring the contract we signed. 6 months with option to renew. If renewing becomes a liability for either of us, we don't renew. And then what? We go back to being just neighbors? Pretend the rest of this didn't happen? I don't know. But I do know that I'm not going to let Richard destroy you because you got caught in my mess. If ending your employment protects you and Mia, then that's what we do. She meant it as protection. Adrian knew that, but it felt like retreat, like she was already preparing for the version of the future where they couldn't make this work. I don't want clean breaks, he said. I want complicated and messy and real. Adrian, I know the timing is terrible. I know we're both dealing with too much to add a relationship on top of it. But I'm tired of making decisions based on what's practical instead of what I actually want. Elena stared at him, and for once she looked uncertain, like she'd walked into a negotiation without knowing what she was willing to concede. What do you want? You? This? Whatever we've been building since I showed up here with a broken fence and a custody case I was losing. That's not a good foundation. Maybe not, but it's the one we have. Sarah came back before Elena could respond, and the moment collapsed back into strategy and preparation. But Adrian saw Elena watching him differently for the rest of the session, like she was recalculating variables in an equation she'd thought she'd already solved. The deposition was scheduled for the following Thursday. Adrian put on the same borrowed suit, tied the tie Mia had fixed for him, and tried to remember Sarah's coaching about staying boring. Jennifer's lawyer, David Morrison, who'd perfected the art of condescending questions, started exactly where Adrian had expected. Mr. Cole, how did you first meet Elena Voss? She's my neighbor. Our properties share a fence line. And when did you begin working for Ms. Voss? Approximately 6 weeks ago. That's quite fast, from neighbor to employee in 6 weeks. She had a position that matched my qualifications. I applied. She hired me. There was a formal application process? There was a conversation about the role, followed by a written contract. Morrison smiled, the expression of someone who'd found an opening. A conversation. How formal was this conversation? It was professional. Was it at her office? It took place at the property line while we were working on the fence. So you were doing manual labor together when she offered you a job as a project manager for her company. Adrian kept his voice level. We were completing a project together. She observed my project management skills and determined they were applicable to her needs. Building a fence is hardly comparable to corporate project management. Project management is project management. Planning, execution, resource allocation, timeline management. The principles are consistent regardless of scale. Morrison made a note, his expression suggesting he thought this was nonsense but didn't have a strong counter. And what is the nature of your relationship with Ms. Voss outside of work? We're neighbors and colleagues. Nothing more? We're friendly. My daughter has become friends with her. We have dinner occasionally. How occasionally? I don't track the frequency. More than once a week? Sarah interjected. Is there a relevant legal question here, or are we just fishing? Morrison shifted tactics. Mr. Cole, are you romantically involved with Elena Voss? No. Have you ever been romantically involved with her? No. Has she ever expressed romantic interest in you? No. Have you ever expressed romantic interest in her? Adrian hesitated for half a second, and Morrison's eyes sharpened. Not in any way that was acted upon, Adrian said, but you are attracted to her. Objection, Sarah said. Relevance? Your client's employment is supposedly based on merit. If there's a personal attraction clouding professional judgment, that's absolutely relevant to whether this position is legitimate or a pretext for Mr. Cole to maintain proximity to a woman he's interested in. Adrian forced himself to breathe steadily. My attraction or lack thereof to my employer doesn't change my ability to do my job. It might change why you were hired. I was hired because I demonstrated skills Ms. Voss needed. Anything else is speculation. Morrison spent another hour trying different angles, but Adrian stuck to the facts without elaborating. By the end, even Morrison looked bored with his own questions. "We're done here," he said finally, gathering his papers. "For now." Outside, Sarah walked Adrian to his car. "You did well. Better than expected, actually." "Did I give him anything?" "The hesitation on romantic interest wasn't great, but you recovered. And honestly, the fact that you admitted there might be attraction actually helps. If you'd denied it completely, you'd look dishonest. This way you look human, but professional." Adrian leaned against his car, feeling the tension drain out of his shoulders. What happens now? They'll review the transcript, look for inconsistencies with the documentation. If they don't find anything actionable, they'll drop it or try a different angle. Sarah's expression was cautiously optimistic. "My guess? They're going to drop it. Morrison's smart enough to know when he's wasting his client's money. Jennifer won't like that." "Jennifer doesn't have to like it. She just has to accept it." Adrian drove home feeling like he'd survived something, though he wasn't sure what. The deposition had been invasive and exhausting, but it had also forced him to say out loud what he'd been avoiding, that he wanted something with Elena, even if the timing was terrible and the circumstances were complicated. Elena was in her yard when he pulled up, standing at the fence like she'd been waiting. She looked at him across the wood they'd built together, and Adrian couldn't read her expression. "How was it?" she asked. "Morrison tried to make it sound like I seduced you for a job." "Did you?" "Not intentionally." Adrian crossed to the fence, close enough to see the tension in her shoulders. "They asked if I was attracted to you. What did you say?" "The truth, that I am, but it hasn't affected my professional judgment." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm buying Richard out." The change in subject was so abrupt that Adrian needed a second to process. "How?" "The board voted against your valuation. I'm taking out a loan, mortgaging everything, including my house. It'll be tight for the next few years, but I'll own the company outright." She met his eyes. "Richard accepted the offer this afternoon. He's out." Adrian felt relief and concern in equal measure. "That's a huge risk." "Yes, but it's my risk, my company, my decision." Elena's hands gripped the fence post. "I'm tired of making choices based on what other people think I should do. Richard, the board, investors who think they know better than me what my company needs. I built this. It's mine. And I'm going to run it the way I think is right, even if that means taking on debt that terrifies me." "What if it doesn't work?" "Then I'll fail. But at least I'll fail on my own terms." She looked at him with something fierce and determined in her expression. "You said you wanted complicated and messy and real. This is me choosing that. For my company. For my life. For whatever this is between us." Adrian felt his heart rate pick up. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when your 6-month contract is up, I want to renew it. Not because I need a project manager, but because you're good at what you do and I trust you. I'm saying that I want to keep having dinner with you and Mia, keep finding rocks in my garden, keep building things together that aren't just fences." Elena took a breath. "I'm saying that I'm attracted to you too, and I'm tired of pretending professional boundaries are enough when what I actually want is to see where this goes. Jennifer's lawyer will use that against me. Let them try. You have stable employment, stable housing, a daughter who's thriving. You're not the same person who showed up here desperate and drowning. You've built something here. They can't take that away with insinuations. Richard might not be done making trouble. Richard is out. The buyout includes a non-compete and a non-disparagement clause. He can't touch the company or anyone associated with it for the next 5 years." Adrian looked at her across the fence that had somehow become the defining metaphor for everything between them. A barrier they'd torn down and rebuilt together, stronger than before. "This is a terrible idea." "Probably. The timing is awful. The worst. We're both disasters." "Absolutely." Elena smiled, and it transformed her face into something softer than Adrian had ever seen. "But we're disasters who built a really good fence together. That has to count for something." Adrian laughed, surprising himself with how genuine it sounded. Then he did what he'd been wanting to do for weeks. He stepped around the fence onto her property and kissed her. Elena kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. It wasn't smooth or practiced or anything like the perfect romance novels described. It was desperate and relieved and complicated. Two people who'd been circling each other finally admitting that what they had was worth the risk. When they broke apart, Elena was smiling. We should probably talk about this. Probably. Set actual boundaries, figure out how to balance work and personal. Definitely. And we should be careful around Mia. She's already attached to you both. We need to make sure we're not setting her up for disappointment. Dad? They jumped apart like teenagers caught by parents, turning to find Mia standing in Elena's yard, holding her latest rock collection and staring at them with wide eyes. Hey, Bug, Adrian said, his voice coming out slightly strangled. What's up? Were you kissing Elena? There was no point in lying. Mia had seen what she'd seen. Yeah, we were. Mia processed this with her usual seriousness. Then she looked at Elena. Are you going to be my dad's girlfriend? Elena glanced at Adrian, and he could see her trying to figure out how to answer in a way that was honest, but didn't make promises they weren't ready for. We're trying to figure that out, Elena said. Is that okay with you? Mia thought about it. Will you still look at rocks with me? Of course. And can we still have dinner together? If your dad says yes, then it's okay. Mia paused. But if you break his heart, I'm keeping all the good rocks I found in your yard. Elena laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. That's fair. Mia nodded, satisfied, and went back to examining her rocks like nothing significant had just happened. Adrian watched her, then looked at Elena, and felt something settle in his chest that had been unsettled for years. Well, he said, I guess we're doing this. I guess we are. They stood there in Elena's perfect yard, with Mia searching for treasures in the grass and the fence standing solid between their properties, and Adrian let himself believe that maybe disasters could build something good together after all. The next 3 months were a study in controlled chaos. Richard's buyout went through without additional drama, though his departure triggered a reshuffling at Voss Technologies that kept Elena working 16-hour days. Adrian managed the transition, coordinating with department heads and smoothing over the concerns of employees who'd grown comfortable with the old structure. Jennifer's lawyer sent one final letter questioning whether Adrian's relationship with Elena constituted a change in circumstances warranting custody modification. Sarah responded with a detailed explanation of how two single adults dating while maintaining separate households and professional boundaries was not, in fact, evidence of instability. The letter was the legal equivalent of an eye roll, and apparently effective. Jennifer dropped the matter. Mia started 3rd grade in the local elementary school and made friends with a girl in her class who was equally obsessed with geology. They spent recesses collecting rocks and comparing notes from library books. And Mia came home every day with stories about sedimentary layers and crystal formations that she'd immediately share with Elena over dinner, because they did have dinner together most nights now. Sometimes at Adrian's house, sometimes at Elena's, occasionally at the diner in town when none of them felt like cooking. It became routine without anyone deciding it should be, the same way Elena's presence in their lives had become essential without anyone officially declaring it. We should talk about what we're doing, Adrian said one night after Mia had gone to bed. They were sitting on Elena's porch, watching the stars and avoiding the serious conversation they both knew needed to happen. What do you want to talk about? Where this is going, what we want it to be. Elena was quiet for a while. Then she said, I want it to be real, not transactional, not strategic, just real. It already is real. I know, but I spent 5 years in a relationship that was built on mutual benefit instead of actual feeling. I don't want to do that again. Even when it's hard, even when the practical thing would be to keep things casual, I want this to be about us actually caring about each other. I do care about you. I know, I care about you too, about both of you. Elena looked at him in the dim porch light. That's what scares me. I've never had to think about anyone else's needs before. It was always just me and my company. Now it's you and Mia, and what if I'm terrible at this? What if I hurt you both because I don't know how to balance everything? Adrian took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Then you'll mess up, and we'll figure it out, and we'll keep going. That's what people do. Is that what you did with Jennifer? No. With Jennifer, I ignored the problems until they became unfixable. Then I made myself small trying to keep the peace, and she resented me for it, and we both ended up miserable. He squeezed Elena's hand. I'm not interested in making myself small anymore. And I don't think you should either. We figure this out together, as equals, or we don't figure it out at all. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time, not solving anything, but at least acknowledging that there were things that needed solving. 2 weeks later, Mia asked the question Adrian had been dreading. Is Elena going to move in with us? They were at the kitchen table, Mia doing homework while Adrian made dinner. Actual dinner, not burned pasta. He'd been taking cooking lessons from a YouTube channel and was getting marginally better. What makes you think that? Adrian asked, buying time. Because she's here all the time, or we're at her house all the time. And you're always holding hands and being gross. We're not gross. You're a little gross. Adrian sat down across from her, giving this the attention it deserved. Would you want Elena to move in with us? Mia chewed on her pencil, thinking, I don't know. I like her, but this is our house. It is. If she moved in, would it still be ours? Yes. It would be ours and hers. What if she wants to change things, make it different? Adrian understood the real question. Mia had been through enough upheaval, the divorce, the move, the custody battle. The last thing she needed was another major shift in her life, even a positive one. Elena's not moving in, Adrian said. At least not anytime soon. She has her own house, and we have ours. We're just spending time together. But you love her, right? The question caught Adrian off guard. He and Elena hadn't said that to each other yet. They'd been careful, taking things slow, not rushing into declarations they weren't ready for. But Mia was looking at him with those serious eyes that saw everything, and Adrian found himself answering honestly. Yeah, Bug. I think I do. Does she love you? I don't know. Maybe. We haven't really talked about it. Why not? Because sometimes grown-ups are stupid about feelings. Mia nodded like this confirmed something she'd suspected. You should tell her, before she gets confused and thinks you don't. Is that what happened with you and Mom? I don't know. You never told me why you guys stopped loving each other. Adrian had been avoiding this conversation for 2 years, telling himself Mia was too young to understand. But she wasn't too young anymore, and she deserved better than vague explanations about grown-up problems. Your mom and I did love each other, Adrian said carefully. But we wanted different things, and instead of talking about it, we just got angry. I wanted her to be okay with me not being successful enough. She wanted me to want the same kind of success she did. Neither of us could give the other what they needed. Do you and Elena want the same things? I think so, but we're still figuring it out. What if you figure out you don't? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to stop trying just because it might not work out. Mia accepted this with a nod and returned to her homework. Adrian went back to cooking, but the conversation stayed with him. Maybe Mia was right. Maybe he needed to stop being stupid about feelings and actually say what he wanted. That weekend, Adrian asked Elena to come over after Mia went to bed. She arrived at 9, looking tired but happy. Carrying a bottle of wine, they split on the back porch while watching the moon rise over their fence. Mia asked if you were moving in, Adrian said. Elena nearly choked on her wine. What did you tell her? That you're not. That we both have our own houses, and we're taking things slow. That was diplomatic. She also asked if I love you. Elena went very still. What did you say? The truth, that I think I do. Adrian set down his glass, turning to face her. I know we said we'd take this slow, and I know we've got a lot to figure out still, but I'm tired of being careful with words when the feelings are already there. Elena looked at him, and he could see her processing, calculating. Elena looked at, trying to find the safe answer. Then she seemed to let something go, and when she spoke, it was without the usual armor. I've never said that to anyone and meant it, she said. With Richard, it was always transactional. I told him I loved him because it was expected, and he said it back because that's what people in our position did. But I don't think either of us felt it. And now? Now I'm terrified, because what I feel for you isn't strategic or practical or any of the things I know how to manage. It's just real, and I don't know how to protect myself from something real. Maybe you don't protect yourself. Maybe you just let it be what it is. What if it breaks me? What if it doesn't? Elena laughed, shaky and uncertain. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's the opposite of simple. But simple was boring anyway. She kissed him then, and it felt different than before. Less desperate, more intentional. Like she was choosing this, choosing him, even with all the fear and uncertainty that came with it. I love you, she said when they broke apart. I don't know what that means for us long term, and I'm probably going to mess this up in ways I can't even anticipate yet. But I love you. I love you too, and you're definitely going to mess it up because I'm going to mess it up too. That's kind of how this works. That's a terrible sales pitch for a relationship. Good thing we're already in one then. They stayed on the porch until late, talking about everything they'd been avoiding, timelines and expectations, and what they wanted their lives to look like a year from now, 5 years from now. They didn't solve everything, but they agreed on the important parts. They wanted to be together. They wanted to include Mia in that decision, and they were willing to do the work to make it actually function. 3 months after that, Elena's company hit its first profitable quarter since the buyout. The debt she'd taken on was still massive, but it was manageable, and the board, now firmly under her control, approved her expansion plans. Adrian's 6-month contract came up for renewal, and Elena offered him a permanent position with a raise that made his eyes water. "You're overpaying me," he said, looking at the offer letter. "I'm paying you what you're worth. There's a difference." "Elena, take the job, Adrian, or don't. But don't insult me by suggesting I'm doing this out of charity." He took the job. Jennifer stopped contacting him entirely after the 3rd time Sarah Chen sent her lawyer a detailed response to their inquiries. The custody arrangement stood, and Mia spent alternating weekends with her mother in the city, coming back each time with stories about museums and restaurants that Jennifer took her to. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and Mia seemed okay with the rhythm of it. 6 months after their first kiss, Elena asked Mia what she thought about them getting married someday. They were at the fence, always the fence, the place where everything important seemed to happen, and Mia was showing Elena a piece of quartz she'd found that had an interesting inclusion. Mia looked up from her rock. "Married like actually married?" "Yes. Would you live with us then?" "Probably, if that's okay with you." Mia thought about it with her usual seriousness. "Would you change things in our house?" "Some things, maybe, but only if we all agreed on them." "Would you still be my dad's boss?" "We'd figure that out. Maybe he'd work for a different part of the company so it's less complicated." "Would you be my mom?" Elena glanced at Adrian, who was watching from the porch, trying not to look like he was eavesdropping. "I'd be your stepmom. You already have a mom. I wouldn't try to replace her." "Good. Because she's annoying sometimes, but she's still my mom." Mia paused. "But you could be my bonus mom. That's what my friend Lily calls her stepmom." "I could do that." "Okay. Then I think you should marry my dad." Elena smiled, and it was the most relaxed Adrian had ever seen her look. "I haven't actually asked him yet." "Why not?" "Because I'm nervous." "Don't be nervous. He's going to say yes. He loves you." "How do you know?" "Because he looks at you the way he looks at me, like you're the best thing that ever happened to him." Elena's eyes went shiny, and she looked away, blinking fast. "That's a pretty high bar." "You're really good at high bars, though. That's kind of your thing." Adrian couldn't help it. He laughed, loud enough that both of them looked up. Elena stood, brushing dirt off her jeans, and walked over to where he was standing. "So," she said. Mia gave her approval. "I heard." "Which means I should probably ask you the actual question. You don't have to. Adrian Cole, will you marry me?" He'd imagined this moment going differently. Something planned and romantic. Maybe him asking her after he'd saved up for a ring, definitely not standing on his back porch in jeans and a t-shirt while his daughter watched from the fence line. But this was better. This was them, imperfect and complicated and real. "Yeah," Adrian said. "Yeah, I'll marry you." Elena kissed him, and Mia cheered from the fence, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Adrian realized he'd stopped thinking about this place as temporary. Somewhere between the fence and the custody battle and falling in love with a billionaire CEO who looked at rocks with his daughter, this had become home. They got married 6 months later in Elena's backyard, with Mia as the ring bearer and a guest list that was deliberately small. Sarah Chen, a few of Elena's executives who'd become friends, Mia's geology-obsessed classmate and her parents, the librarian who'd helped Mia find all those rock books. Richard Palmer wasn't invited, and neither was Jennifer. Though Mia spent the week before the wedding with her mother so she could be part of the planning. The ceremony was short and honest. They wrote their own vows, standing at the fence that had started everything. Adrian promised to stop making decisions based on fear and to keep building things with Elena even when it was hard. Elena promised to let herself be imperfect and to remember that the best things in her life hadn't come from strategic planning. They both promised to put Mia first, to communicate instead of hiding, and to never let work become more important than what they'd built together. It wasn't poetic or particularly romantic, but it was true, and that mattered more. After the ceremony, while everyone was eating cake and Mia was showing the guests her rock collection, Elena pulled Adrian aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing him an envelope. Inside was a deed, not to her house or his house, but to both properties combined into a single parcel. She'd had the lot lines redrawn, merging their land into one piece. "We don't need a fence anymore, Sasina," Elena said. "It did its job, but I thought maybe we could take it down, build something else in that space." Adrian looked at the fence that had brought them together, then at the woman who'd rebuilt his life by letting him rebuild hers. "What should we build?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a garden, maybe a workshop. Maybe just leave it open and see what grows there." "That sounds perfect." They took down the fence the following weekend, all three of them working together to remove the boards they'd put up so carefully. Some of the wood was still good, and they stacked it in the garage for future projects. The rest went to recycling, pieces of a barrier that had served its purpose and wasn't needed anymore. Where the fence had stood, they planted a garden, vegetables and flowers mixed together in a way that probably violated every landscaping principle but looked right to them. Mia insisted on a section for rocks, where she could display her collection and add to it as she found new specimens. Adrian stood in the middle of the combined yards, looking at the house he'd inherited from an uncle he barely knew, and the house next door that Elena had bought when she was still trying to prove she could have everything under control. Both of them had come here running from something, him from a life that was falling apart, her from a relationship that was slowly suffocating her. They'd found each other in the wreckage and built something that neither of them had planned for. It wasn't the life Adrian had imagined when he drove here with Mia asleep in the back seat. It was better, messier, more complicated, and more real. Sometimes the best things came from disasters, from moments when everything fell apart and forced you to rebuild from scratch. Sometimes you inherited more than a house. You inherited a chance to start over, to choose differently, to let yourself want things you'd convinced yourself were impossible. Adrian had come here to survive. He'd stayed to live, and somewhere in between, he'd found what he'd been missing all along, a home that wasn't just a place, but the people who filled it with love and laughter and really impressive rocks. The fence was gone now, but what they'd built together was stronger than wood and nails could ever be. It was built on honesty and effort, and the decision to keep choosing each other even when it would be easier to quit. That kind of foundation didn't need barriers to protect it. It just needed two people willing to do the work. And a kid who reminded them both that sometimes the most important things in life were the small moments, like finding a perfect piece of quartz, or burning pasta together, or standing in a garden where a fence used to be and knowing you were exactly where you belonged.